They say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. You'll either be a Union man or a thug for J.H. Blair. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Tell me, which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?
Fellow workers, this is Dalton and Benjamin with the Louisville Workers Brigade, and we're excited to introduce our friend and fellow labor organizer, Chris Townsend. Chris has been involved in the labor movement for decades. He was a member of the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America and the Amalgamated Transit Union. Currently, Chris runs several union organizing schools, with one being called the Insider Organizer School, which focuses on training future organizers to be salts, which is a concept where an organizer will go into a workplace that's non-unionized with the intent to unionize the workplace. Chris also got in a very important book, which will be a part of this talking of our subject today, called American Trade Unionism, back in print, which has been found its way into the hands of young, enthusiastic organizers, such as the Starbucks campaign. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. To begin, could you begin by introducing yourself and your experience with the labor movement?
Sure. Chris Townsend's the name. Been at it for 45 years. This is year 45 since I joined the Amalgamated Transit Union when I was literally a kid and a volunteer organizer in the city of Tampa, Florida, which is kind of where I started. But I have gone on through that first experience, only left that very successful campaign because I met my wife down there. So we're still going around after 41 years. So that was a good move. But I moved on from that to upstate New York, and I was a SALT with the UFCW local there. That transformed into a staff job with the SEIU local there, kind of the old SEIU. And then I was recruited to work for UE. I knew quite a few of the UE leaders through the Communist Party. And then I retired after 25 years with UE only because I had a chance to return to ATU and be the organizing director. There had been some real changes in that union. Larry Hanley was elected president, things that were unthinkable when I was a member of the ATU. So it was a very, very, very difficult decision to leave after 25 years. I was also the political officer, so I had quite a position. I was very successful, but I thought, damn it, I'm going to give it a shot at ATU. And I took on in 2013 an enormous workload to restart a new organizing department, create out of thin air a collective bargaining department, and put together a field mobilization department, none of which they ever had. So that kept me busy, and I retired at least technically a couple of years ago, and have just been engaged in 101 different things, but very, very timely things. So thanks.
Absolutely. It sounds like you've been very busy even after you've retired, which I know that it to me that shows dedication that, is important, because even after being retired, you're still wanting to put in the work. It's honestly very inspiring, and I'm very thankful for the work you put in every day.
Yeah, it was a privilege to be able to work for the union. I never had direct aspirations to be a staff guy. Today, there's quite a few folks at a very young age that sort of get it in their head that that's desirable. It might be. Every situation is different, but by the time I finally was recruited to work for the SEIU, Old Local 200 in upstate New York, I had already been up to my earlobes for almost 9 years in everything imaginable, every facet of organizing and bargaining and striking and salting and jeepers, you name it. So I found my moving on to the staff was it's part of what made it more easier for me. And then I managed to finish out continuously anyway, 35, 37 years of staff time. But today I'm operating at a staff level. I just don't get paid. I have two pensions, thanks to all that work. Thank goodness for pensions. So I'm able, and I should mention I retired a bit for health reasons as well. I have tremendous heart and vascular disease, so it's probably good for me, not knowing how much longer I'm going to have when I can really function. So, but it's been a good run.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sorry to hear that you have health complications. But again, thank you for the work you've been doing. And you know, honestly, I'm glad that we have people like you that are part of the labor movement. Um, moving on, uh, let's talk about the figure who's very important to the book American Trade Unionism, which is William Z. Foster. Who was William Z. Foster, and how did he engage in and with the labor movement? How did Foster's experiences shape his understanding of the aims of the labor movement, and how did this understanding affect his work?
Yeah, William Z. Foster. I think more folks today in our labor and left movement have heard of him than was the case even a decade ago, and certainly 20 or 30 years ago. And it's not a moment too soon. William Z. Foster literally is second only to Eugene Debs in his impact that he had on the U.S. labor movement. And of course, not a surprise at all that both of them are up to their earlobes in revolutionary movements. One of them, the Socialist Party of old, and Foster, then the Communist Party. And it he was a figure that left his footprint on the labor movement in so many different ways. But owing to the fact that he was one of the leaders and eventually the general secretary of the Communist Party and a lot of other things, he's not credited for any of this. Employers, wouldn't understand that today, certainly wouldn't be interested or supportive of it. We have a left wing in the United States that's larded up with a lot of dilettantes and lightweights and folks who sit and want to criticize a figure like Foster. Well, they're not fit to criticize Foster, a guy that had the kind of record. They may disagree, but you have to recognize what his impact was. And his impact was uh, slow and steady as he has his own political thinking evolved from sort of an ultra leftist and a syndicalist and some of the vogues of the time, understandable so. But he eventually came to the realization that probably a lot of folks today in the left ought to come to the realization, which is we're not going to win anything if we're just wheeling around without discipline, without structure, without some cohesive, unifying ideology. And in the case of the trade union movement, sort of a systematic analysis of business unionism as it's been, grown up in American conditions. And therefore, we have to concentrate our forces. We have to be disciplined about that. And we have to drive forward kind of several strategies at the same time. We're called upon, and I'll say Foster's mission then, like today, is so self-evident to any leftist that would sort of become acquainted with Foster and then say, wow. And guys, that's the most common feedback I hear from young workers who are introduced to that book in the very recent period here. Several dozen will, and I'm paraphrasing all of them, but they'll essentially say to me something along the line of, well, that book I got, that was amazing. It's the same thing that I'm doing and fighting in my own union today as he was 100, 125 years ago. So I think no one needs a speech about the timeliness of it from Chris Townsend. Just take the kind of the way that the younger generation has learned from this. So in any case, Foster was a transformative figure and changed and evolved over his career, but his work in terms of promoting industrial unionism as opposed to craft unionism, then trying to wield that into a force that could be used to organize masses of workers. It was also an era when, I think he's the one that coined this phrase, that all organizing is to prepare for strike. And that's literally what you have if you have no legislative framework to operate within. And this was long before the Railway Labor Act or the National Labor Relations Act. So we understood that this is what it took, was the organization had to be done systematically and across racial and ethnic lines, uh, and then eventually schedule a showdown with the employer. So he led, gave birth to, and was the strategist of the great meat packing campaign, which was sort of a federated campaign of the various crafts. Having learned from that, he moved forward with the Great Steel Organizing Drive, which of course ended up in a strike, became what's known as the Great Steel Strike, which was a failure. But if you study that structure, what you'll see is a labor leadership almost to the last union, 26, I believe, different unions in that industry who were determined to not organize that industry. So he found himself wasting valuable months, from the post-war boom conditions into a situation where really that strike organizing drive and then strike failed because of the delay that had been thrown down before him. But that was followed by a strike that he played much less of a role in, which was the National Railroad Shop strike in 1922. It was also defeated. And then we were into the 1920s. So Foster was chastened, had gained a lot of experience. A lot of militants were trained. The business unions had exposed themselves again and again as part of the problem. And he spent the entire 20s and early 30s sort of experimenting with the Trade Union Educational League. Anybody reading, U.S. left labor history will come across the TUEL pretty quickly. And then there was a short period where it was morphed into an organization in the early 30s known as the Trade Union Unity League, which college professors and other hangers-on will criticize that as if it was some big mistake. Well, what they forget was that they had no choice but to start these independent unions in many industries because the business unions had expelled everyone tainted with any left type piece. This was as much a deliberate act as it was an act of necessity to put together the TUUL. And of course, again, the history reflects that the second that the situation began to change within the AFL at that time, the TUUL went back into it to bore from within. That was one of Foster's admonitions. Get into the existing unions, bore, push, play your role. Don't go off and start perfect, cut out of some perfect piece of cloth. Don't play that game. It's a failure in virtually all situations. By that point, the IWW was at a low ebb and it wasn't coming back. And in any case, Foster, through this, and I'm being very brief, of course, but the situation then opened up in the middle 1930s into the later 1930s, and literally you could say with no hyperbole that Foster, poured the foundation and his forces in the TUEL, the TUUL, and the Communist Party. They poured the foundation for what became the Committee for Industrial Organization, and then the Committee for Industrial Organization. And of course, all leftists, serious anyway, studies look at this and say, wow, this is an amazing time. How did it happen? How could we do that again? Well, this is what led me to get that book back into print, because that really it's not the last word on the topic, and Foster wasn't right about everything, but there's so many similarities to what we face today as to what they face. So that's a bit of a quick encapsulation of Foster and where he came from. I could elaborate if you want, but
Yeah, I had read the book leading up to this educational, and I've obviously heard about Foster, read a little bit about Foster, a little bit of Foster, but this was the first full book that I had read of his works, and was just blown away. I mean, by him as a as an organizer, the amount of industries that he had been involved in, the amount of contacts that he had made. I mean, he's citing, some of the great labor leaders. You mentioned Debs. Mother Jones was cited in there. Fitzpatrick of the Chicago Labor Council. Jack Johnstone, of course, in Chicago. And then a couple months back, the brigade actually had Dr. Rick Halpern, who has done a lot of work on the Chicago stockyards and UPWA. And his books talk obviously quite a bit about Foster. We had watched The Killing Floor together a few weeks ago, and it's shocking and it's a great movie, but as involved as Foster was in the meatpacking industry of Chicago, the fact that he wasn't even mentioned in the movie is pretty crazy.
Yeah, there's some deep-seated anti-communist bias that come from different quarters, some left quarters, that just are reluctant or apprehensive about mentioning him, which is sad. The fact is, we wouldn't have had any of those major organizing drives. We never would have had a CIO upsurge had it not been for hard left Marxist, communist, and revolutionary socialist elements, and in spite of considerable numbers of ultra leftists who get in the way, and whatever they think they're doing, it's usually divisive and without a base. But you just have to deal with that. But Foster was a can-do, get-it-done guy, and that's always animated me. I'm not sure why. I think some of it is I went right from high school to work. He never even finished high school, but I know when I landed in the workplace in 1979, I had to get busy. Having a union wasn't just something that I wanted to have out of some notion, a romantic notion that I could have a union card. I needed to make more money. I needed to get the boss off my neck. And that motivation has only grown over the decades. I've always been a believer in, reading, studying, getting your facts in order, compising a plan, and moving forward. And moving forward is risky because you're either going to succeed or you're going to fall. And we have many, many folks in our movement. I realize, guys, I'm being a little bit self-critical of our movement and some of our folks, but I think that's called for. We have way, way too many folks in our movement here who already know enough to know who Foster is, and maybe even have developed opinion. But what are they doing? What workers are they talking to? What campaigns are they actually moving? Where are they putting a shovel in the ground to actually begin to dig some earthworks here to rebuild the labor movement? And I guess in my world, that's kind of my mark of delineation. If folks are doing something, I'm willing to give tremendous latitude because I never have thought that I knew it all or could know what was best for everybody. But the propensity of far too much of our movement to sit around and study and grossly overthink everything, and become paralyzed with searches for perfect moments. And, then of course it invariably devolves into divisive arguments about these things. So I won't mention any of the groups, but if I wanted to, I could go through and mention name brand national left groups who have been staring into their belly button for several years with no activity in terms of their labor activities. It just becomes a sort of a playing with themselves. And anyway, I only divert on that for a minute because I find it really frustrating and at times contemptible, because we are up to our earlobes in unorganized workers. Where you all are there in northern Kentucky, southern Ohio, there and all that, 90% of the working class, maybe more, is unorganized and suffering. I mean, what goes on in the U.S. workplace today is an abomination. Every organizing school that I have run for the last 20 years at least, I'll make sure that I make a declaration relatively early, which is I say the workplace in the United States, what is it? What is the workplace in the United States? Well, I'll tell you what it is. If I need to tell you, it's a dictatorship. It's a damn dictatorship, getting worse by the minute. And therefore, all of this stalling and overthinking and pondering and hoping and no, we need a Marxist scientific approach, a Foster approach to this, so we can say, okay, where are we? How are we going to pull this together? What can we do to launch union organizing, which it's going to be that in most workplaces, and what are we talking about when we talk about union organizing? We're launching workplace rebellions against the dictatorship of the boss. There's no way around that. There's no reason to overplay that. There's no reason to try to scare the pants off people. But it's a fact that we're not going to be able to move towards any solutions, even momentary solutions to these, horrible conditions, low wages, no benefits of any real meaning, if we don't get it together to launch more of these rebellions. So, I mean, that little speech I just gave about launching workplace rebellions, that's what I do every day and every week with anyone I can reach. Probably at this time, probably 7 or 8 different sectors that I'm working in. It's not going to work in every one, but absent an organized rebellion, nothing will get better. Nothing. And, that's kind of what we're looking for is the elements within labor that see that and would support that.
Absolutely. And I think a big thing that you really touch upon this is that you can read so much, but if you're not engaging with working people, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's the thing Foster understood too, was like, even every failure he had, he was learning from that in order to then be better at trying to engage with working people and organize them. And for me, working at a UPS, I understood that like it wasn't the ideas of labor that got me to want to organize and figure stuff out. It was having worked at UPS. The workplace forced me to do that, and that's a big thing that I think a lot of people tend to forget. And you are right that they're so worried about the finer details of a theory and understanding the world, but they're not engaging with like what people are doing with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, Foster, you both you guys haven't read the book. You may recall this. Foster puts forward an assertion that is incredibly key. That is, the left wing must do the work. The left wing is the only section of the labor movement that possesses the understanding, the drive, the coherence, and the discipline to take on the employer through these workplace rebellions. And as anyone who's been involved in any kind of normal union-led organizing, it invariably devolves down to an academic exercise or appeals to the better nature of the employer or hopefulness, essentially an idealistic, a religious hopefulness, actually, that somehow they'll get through this and succeed. And Foster, and I guess I've just always seen that as the more successful organizing tactic is to, this is science. This is a class struggle that you're trying to, push it up to red hot and move the workers. That's our job, to move these workers and teach and lead them into this rebellion. And I know this may sound a little bit hyperbolic, perhaps, or whatnot, but anyone who's been through a union organizing drive knows the employer is certainly not ambivalent about how we feel about this. Their reaction against it in every single case will prove to you. I always say there's 2 things that happen in many workers' careers and experiences that kind of are like a splash of frozen cold water on their face. One is when they go through a union organizing drive, and as the union likely has predicted, the employer is going to be batshit about it. They're just going to freak out that somehow their workers are actually putting an organization together to demand things and push for better. The second thing that'll happen in many workers' experiences over their life, they'll be on strike. And then they'll see that every single solitary time, absent, nowhere, never, the employer calls the cops, and the cops always hassle you. They do not go inside and investigate or arrest the gross law breaking that goes on and all these things. They only enforce the laws that protect the private property and the privileges of the dictatorial privileges of the boss. So anybody who's ever been around a strike and you see that, that's the moment when workers begin to, if they haven't already, figure out, geez, it looks like that's the state structure here that's on the boss's side. Wow, maybe I need a political solution here that's more ambitious than what the Democrats and Republicans offers. So anyway, it fosters adages for me. There's many of them. Just always kind of click in my mind when I've gone through different experiences.
The one of the things that you just mentioned kind of spurred one of the primary goals of the brigade is to get non-union folks onto picket lines and onto strikes to be able to experience the solidarity and of what a direct action like a work stoppage can do, and watching these non-union folks see what that looks like and experience a picket line for the first time just is eye-opening and oftentimes life-changing, that we've seen folks experience that and immediately start looking into organizing their workplaces. And unfortunately, that's not something that we're seeing a lot of from the established labor movement right now, is engaging, like you said, the unorganized. It's almost like they're content with what they have, not realizing that the ground that they're standing on is eroding because the owning class that is, they don't take a break. They're constantly assaulting our class.
Right.
So this idea of constant struggle, the workplace rebellion that you're talking about is essential, because if we're not continuing to fight and struggle, we're going to lose. There's not any stagnant, we're not going to be able to just stand where we are and rest on our laurels.
The owning class will outmaneuver us because as you said, the owning class is constantly focused on how do we circumvent the union? How do we beat the union? And so every contract you get is not a moment of peace. It's a temporary of open hostilities, which as in a strike. But every time a worker has a grievance, every time the bosses do something, it is all in a battleground of where the bosses are trying their damnedest to find ways to cut through the contract to weaken the union, because they realize if they can beat the union there, they can then destroy the union, which is why we have to have a constant struggle and have to have these workplace rebellions. Otherwise, we will go back to square one because the bosses will win.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of truisms in there that both of you touched on. The employers never completely accept the existence of any kind of trade union, even a weak, miserable conservative union. The employers are never going to tolerate for all time its existence or respect it, because as long as that germ of rebellion is there, they realize that this is potential fuel for a fire if they decide to unilaterally operate dictatorially as they do. And that is something that a lot of people have to see and learn for themselves. And something else that one of you guys mentioned was it's an old adage that I learned somewhere along the way, long, long ago, that animates not only my trade union work, but my political work, my Marxist organizing and all that. And it's this. I believe it comes down from the Romans. I don't want to give them too much credit, but they were what they were. But and I'm not a military guy, but the adage was, when you were too weak to defend, you must attack. When you are too weak to defend, you must attack. Well, this illustrates practically every failure we have when we have it, because we suffer many more defeats in our movement because we've been reluctant, timid, waited too long, didn't want. Now, that's not to excuse reckless, wild charges and all against impossible odds, but it is always something I know. When all my 25 years with the United Electrical Workers, a fine union, folks should investigate it. A very interesting union, sort of a living fragment of the TUEL, TUUL, and the CIO. You can literally look, if you were in UE, you would recognize certain aspects that have been preserved. But we always understood the need to move forward. Time is not on our side in any moment of this. A good example of this is this last week I had some conversations with one of the true, he's not a Marxist, he's not a leftist in a typical sense, but Ralph Nader is one of the most interesting and one of the best, what would you call it, you know, someone who his whole approach to his life has been just, incredible in terms of his partisanship on behalf of working people at all different levels. Not a union guy, not a Marxist, but we were having a discussion about the AFL-CIO. And of course, what are we seeing? We see a lot of things at a certain point, but Ralph was interested in some of my organizing that's going on. And I said, well, the problem, Ralph, is the AFL, much like Foster's time, when times are good, that's time to kick back, take a day off. And Foster recognized, like any real union organizer will recognize, that when economic conditions are better, because they're never good, but when they're better, that's when you have to push on the accelerator and move as fast as you can to move forward until, prior to the deterioration of the economy, and then that pall of fear and dread that falls on wage slaves who at that point are all worried about losing their jobs or having incredible difficulty getting a new job. So your whole generation has been through kind of a very remarkable um, period of your lives, the last 15, 20 years, but that's not going to last forever. The booms never do. And it just is very aggravating to me. And I shared that with Brother Nader because it's part of what explains my urgency with salting and, launching campaigns and not just waiting for things to come out of thin air and, come together out of the ether. And that's a moment that we're in today. We have a lot of the unions, most of them, in my opinion, just wasting what is a golden moment. This is what Foster faced in the packing house campaign and the great steel organizing campaign. Unions dawdling around, taking vacation, waiting, hoping, uh, delaying to next week what they needed to do 6 weeks ago and all that. It's a deadly sin in our movement, and therefore moving that forward in a very aggressive way is something that it bears reminding.
I think that's a good segue into next question. So the brigade differentiates between two primary types of unionism or approaches to organizing. The terms we use are class collaboration unionism, often called business unionism, which is the idea that we as working people can have a peaceful coexistence with the bosses, and that if the company's doing well, then the workers will inevitably do well. And then the second approach, the philosophy that the brigade adheres to, we call class struggle unionism, which obviously we didn't invent that term, and that's the idea that the interests of the owning class are diametrically opposed to the interests of the working class. Could you explain how these philosophies have influenced the organizing work of Foster, your organizing work, and how you see these two ideas play out in the modern labor movement today?
Sure. A very key question that gets very little examination. It kind of gets left. Somebody's in the movement for 7 years or 17 years, and then finally they realize that this is a conversation they need to have. What are we doing here? I would say we face in the labor movement, much like the left wing movement, the iron law of uneven development. Workers come to us, and sometimes folks not from the worker strata who come to us, both left wing and labor, and they come when they come under the circumstances that brings them in. And some come in very rapidly, and some come in very slowly. Some come and go like a boomerang, and they're gone again. It's amazing sometimes when I look at both of our movements. They're parallel, but I wonder how do we manage to get as much done as we do when we have this kind of chaotic situation constantly. And of course, none of it is textbook conditions, especially with the employer and the state structures always looking to nip it in the bud. But the type of union, I think, is very critical. And I think it would be well advised for all young workers or older workers figuring these things out, whatever point there are, is to see that there are competing versions of trade unionism. When I joined the labor movement, I wanted to win. I didn't want to have just a more moderated, horrible daily experience at work. I had some horrible jobs by any definition when I was a member. And, I looked at this and thought, no, our job is not just to moderate this and put a break for some small relief. We'll take that. Every worker fights for that, daydreams for that. But it never was a big leap for me. I want to replace this system. This system is rotten, rotten to the core, corrupt and rigged against the workers at every turn. It creates pestilence, war. Sadly, we see that the decay of the U.S. empire now fomenting literally wars across practically every continent now. Uh, I mean, it's the prophecy of the old socialist old timers that taught us this, should have taught us this. You can't change the system. It is what it is. Imperialism, capitalism is what it is. And in any case, in terms of our uh, dealing with it, we have to come to grips with the fact that we need to think through what is the kind of union we want. Do we want the kind of a union that will win as much as we possibly can and then build the political machinery needed to eventually gain control, win control, however we do that? Or are we going to be satisfied like the business unions are with sort of, a little slower pace of the exploitation, of extra crumb, maybe even a few slices that get ladled out to us and that. And that then we can somehow make it until we're whatever age it is that they decide to throw us away. And it's a slave's mentality. And maybe that's the difference between chattel slavery and serfdom. Yeah, it's an advance, but it doesn't get you anywhere. It's not going to set you free. It's not going to provide you with the real benefits that you should have as a worker. And if anything, for those that are thoughtful, and I think in our movement, the vast majority of us are thoughtful in our own ways, some more sophisticated than others. If you look at the wealth being generated by today's economic engines, and just look at what has been stripped away from us so that we're actually having serious conversations in the business media about who's going to be the first official trillionaire in the world. Well, I mean, this is a pretty appalling, think of that. The first trillionaire will have appropriated $1 trillion from a whole army of workers out there doing things. And what the hell did they contribute to this? And then look at all the problems that it creates, all the strife and war and pestilence. So I don't know. In my case, I was beneficiary. Maybe I possess a lot of these sort of basic old Marxian trade union militant class struggle union type things because that was the way I joined the labor movement. I didn't go to college. Um, Certainly going to college is a wonderful thing. I'm all for it, but I never had the chance to go. So I missed a lot. One of the things I didn't miss was apparently, from what I can tell, an awful lot of people go through college and they become trained to engage in unbelievable amounts, years and decades of gross overthinking without any action. And I think that's maybe natural because people know when you're going to get involved in union organizing, you're going to get involved in that. Yeah, it's kind of like climbing up on the diving board and having to jump for the first time. It takes an element of courage and decisiveness. And as long as a person can delay that or has circumstances that allow that to be delayed. So that doesn't make any of these folks bad people or anything other than good workers trying to do it. But they're not people who are going to build our movement and win. And when anyone has been through a union organizing drive, it's a quite fascinating thing. You'll see the first people who come out to the first union meeting when the submarine, so to speak, comes up from underground, and people can see that there's actually a union going on. It frequently happens in a early union meeting that the union will try to orchestrate. And you'll see the faces who come, and there's people who stick out more prominently than others. But I always say to any union organizer, look at the faces who come out in the beginning and look at the faces who are still with you there at the end. And it's frequently a completely different set of people. This really is an interesting selection process of folks with courage and real deep understanding. And it's not necessarily the earliest folks who come forward and raise their hand are the ones who are the best or the ones that are long lived in that organizing drive. So, over my career, I can think of some really fascinating remembrances of organizing drives where people really surprised me that they grew and developed at the rate they did. It's all. I was telling this story the other day to somebody. It's also you'll see, the trade union organizing, unlike left work, gets you into immediate intersection with right wing workers and declassed elements and completely confused and terrorized workforce. And I remember the very first, well, not the first, but it was an early campaign I worked in when I was a union organizer with UE, was in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And I walked up the driveway. We were trying to organize a General Electric plant. And I walked up the driveway, and the guy I was trying to talk to is El Camino. If anybody remembers what the El Camino was, it was in the driveway and it had a Bush bumper sticker on it. This was Bush the father at the end of the Reagan regime. So I remember thinking, oh boy, this is great. How did I draw this straw? So this guy's going to be a lunatic. Well, I went in there and he wasn't a lunatic. And anyway, here we are now, however many years that is, 40 years later. He's absolutely one of us politically. And it's because we took the time with him. We were patient with him, and he saw the value and the sort of the righteousness of what we were doing. And he's been a lifetime union organizer. He's now a member of Transport Workers Union in Houston, Texas, fixing buses and very active. And I mean, it's just a remarkable story. There's others, but that's one that sticks up in my mind. And I say, this is we're a movement that is akin to bringing light to the blind, frankly, with the working class. You have to have that willingness to be patient with folks and not just immediately scorn them and correct them for what they have no idea it is they've done in that early phase, at least. So,
What are your tips for identifying and cultivating that militant minority that Foster talks about, and that ultimately is going to, lead our class to, greater progress and ultimately, hopefully, the revolution that we need to overthrow in this system that we're all suffering under, and to move towards a new workers' world?
yeah. Well, I'll quote someone that everybody's probably heard of, Pete Seeger. I had the great pleasure of getting to know him a little bit. Him and his wife lived along the Hudson River in Beacon, New York, and I used to go by to see him in my period when I was in the Communist Party. He was a tremendous supporter of what we did, and fundraising was part of why I would go by. But he always had, and I think he wove it into quite a few of his songs, he would always say, take it easy, but take it. Take it easy, but take it. And what I see too much of our movement, and I think it's a fair observation, is we have a lot of heat and light, and we have tremendous thoughtful numbers of people and debate and discourse and all this, but how much actual action? At the end of the day, how many unorganized workers have you spoken to? Have you spoken to them about trade unionism and the merits and the need for them to play their part? Have you spoken to them about the class struggle, Marx, our philosophy of our movement? Have you? And that's real easy to say because we're not a society that gives you much context. You're thinking to yourself, "Gosh, I work with this person, and I'd like to talk to him about this." Well, do I even think that they would have a clue what it is I was trying to get at? Well, you have to have enough confidence in the basic class consciousness of workers. And if you do, you'll be grateful, or you'll be surprised many cases that workers understand that this is a rigged system. They understand that it's unfair. They understand that they're in frankly, a powerless uh, moment in time. And then what our mission is to not only offer them clarification that that's the case, but to be able to detail and explain to them why that is and why it will remain that way until we challenge it. And in my particular case, I'm a man of structure and discipline. That's the way I was trained. That's the way I do it. You're not going to make success against this system unless you're organized and disciplined and assertive. It just is farcical. Again, I keep mentioning, maybe I'm not, uh, maybe I shouldn't, but maybe I feel compelled. We have a tremendous amount of our left wing in the United States. Everybody knows the different groups, the websites, all the things going on. Well, are they looking outward or are they looking inward? And if you want to look inward, fine, doesn't make you bad people, but you're not going to challenge for power. You're not going to organize anything. So you really have to say to yourself, how do I talk to workers? How do I get a conversation started? And I guess I was lucky that in the first job I got out of high school, the union was already underway organizing this gigantic group. So I really only had to join it. There was something there for me to jump into. So that's probably a big advantage that I had. It was not left to Chris Townsend alone. Now, later in my career, I did a series of salting projects with the UFCW. That was completely up to me to try to figure out how we moved whatever we could move in those workplaces. And, it's probably this is, one of those discussions you can't have enough. You have to, first of all, live and feel like your coworkers. I wasn't a missionary. I wasn't in there because I had won the lottery and I was in there doing, charity missionary work. And I was one of them. And I had to just sort of painstakingly talk to people and say, this is wrong. And what ends up happening to any worker that puts themselves in that situation, you'll see real quick that it validates a public poll that the AFL is quick to pull out all the time. Did you know that 70%, a poll just came out this morning that said that 70% of the workers in the country are sympathetic to unions? Well, yeah, go see that for yourself. That's always been my experience. Large majorities of people will support the union. Now, they'll be scared out of it frequently or terrified at the thought of having to admit that to anyone but themselves. But there's a tremendous innate organic class consciousness. So it's really there for us. We just have to do the work. And yeah, it's going to be trial and error. You're going to guess right sometimes, guess wrong, but you must move forward. There's no time to waste.
One of the things I was thinking about in engaging with workers and like you had mentioned, not ignoring the more conservative reactionary segments of the working class. I had a coworker, he was a new hire, just started, and I give him a few days to get settled in, and then immediately I start talking politics with them. And we were in cubicles right next to each other. I just peeked my head over one day. I was like, "So, are you political?" And he said he was. And I said, "Well, what sort of ideology do you identify with?" And he said, "Well, I'm a conservative." And I was like, "Well, what does that mean to you?" And he said that he doesn't like the idea of working to pay for someone else. And of course, he was referring to the single mother on welfare and food stamps. And so I just smiled at him. I said, "Oh, you must hate bosses then." And he didn't know how to respond to it at first, but then we started talking, and I talked about how, what he just explained, working for someone else's benefit, like that's exactly what our system is that we are all working to make someone else wealthy. And we worked together for a number of months. I work in the car business, and he ended up, because of the political education and conversations that we had, he ended up getting out of the car business, which I highly recommended because it's just exhausting, exploitative work. And he evolved dramatically politically and ended up getting a union job when he left. And again, if we had just ignored, if he had said I'm a conservative, and I just immediately wrote him off as a racist and a, queer phobic and all that, we never would have made any progress. But this is a guy that, he may not be signing up to join a revolutionary socialist party tomorrow, but he is far closer. And now he's extremely pro-union, and he has developed a level of class consciousness that would not have been possible had we not engaged in that conversation.
Absolutely. You both kind of definitely both of you touch upon this, is that you get a group of people in the room, they can have different, beliefs and whatnot, but they'll all agree that things are messed up. But they'll understand that, they hate the work, they understand that things are horrible. The question always comes down to then what's the reason behind that, and that's where people have their different beliefs. Like some will say the economy, some will say it's a group of people. They don't know the answer, but they all agree that the central issue is there. And so just talking and building that rapport with them can help us be able to be like, okay, well, let's come together and figure it out. We're going to meet people that we're not going to like. We're going to meet people that are going to deeply offend us. They're going to say things that we don't think is right. But we understand that the vast majority of people are going to say things we don't like. And if we maintain these, very narrow groupings, we run the very risk of just remaining very insular. As you talk about, Chris, a lot of groups that are national scope are focusing so much on the internal, they're forgetting that the rest of the working class is everywhere else. And you have to go where the working class is, because without a majority support or, collective strength, nothing can get done.
Yeah, everybody listening probably has lived through this. I mean, in terms of being a union organizer, we're there to see if we can connect with their class consciousness or develop that. Political consciousness of a much left development will come later. Every worker does it, or every left worker does it. I did it. You make some mistakes, you repulse some people, or they get the wrong impression, or they shut down, or something. But you refine, you go back, and what you're really looking to do is connect with their basic class consciousness and sense that by themselves they're going to go nowhere. But if they unify, keyword being unity and unify. Now I'll say this was drilled into me like the first week that I worked for the city of Tampa and joined the ATU, because I had gone down there right after high school. It was a whirlwind. I get out of high school, there's no jobs in Pennsylvania. I go down there, I have an uncle, I stay with him, he pulls the string, gets me hired at the city. ATU is organizing not just the bus system, but the entire city. That was forced on him by the state labor code. And here I am on day 1, 2, 3, going into the lunchroom. And back then, diversity meant, in that city, it meant white and black men. That was it. There was no Hispanics of much, or they were very anglicized. If there was no women in our department. Anyway, I sat in the picnic, the room where we had our lunch. I sat in the middle, and all the black guys at one end, all the white guys at the other. And, you're brand new. It sucks when you're new. You don't know anybody. You're just trying to keep the job and get by, get through the day. Anyway, the union organizer, Bob Garcia, comes through, and he saw me sitting there by myself. So I was like shark bait. And I remember one of the things he said in that very earliest meeting with him, because I did not join the union immediately. I had enough sense to say, well, I'm not going to join anything without doing a little bit of homework or thinking it through. I just literally, this guy comes up to me. First, I had heard about the union drive that was going on. Of course, I'm only there a couple of days, and you keep your mouth shut when you're new, right? So anyway, he says to me, how come you sat here in the middle? Among other things. I mean, he was just a very, very comfortable guy. I said, well, I don't know any of those guys, and I don't know any of those guys, so I sat here in the middle. And he says, well, that's fair. He says, but let me explain something to you. We're starting a union here, and I want you to join. He gave me the card. I'll answer any questions you have. I'll introduce you to other people. We're going to take that end of the table, and we're going to take this end of the table. We're going to fuse it together, because the only way we're going to make any progress here is to unify and fight this boss as a common front. And that he asked my name. He says, Chris, he says, you don't have to want to date these workers' daughters, eat their food, live in their neighborhoods, listen to their music, or any other damn thing. Yeah, I'm continuing. He gave me this speech about unity. And he says, you as a worker, you'd better get it through your head that you'd better live with these workers, work with these workers, unify with these workers, put all this division and all these differences and preferences and phobias, put them right out on this curb where they belong. Because if you don't, you're going to die broke. You're going to die poorless, toothless, poor. Florida poor back then was poor. And he says the only way for you to put one foot in front of the other and have a better life is to unify. And I remember thinking about that, thinking, well, yeah, I guess I don't know. I have preferences, I have bias, I have phobias, I have likes and dislikes. But that was it made so much sense to me. And I'll mention in today's world, your generation especially just revels in diversity. I mean, it's been developed by the college campus and the employers, the HR departments as a whole social science now, diversity and all this. I think it's wonderful, with one exception. I've never heard anyone get up at the end of any of these diverse discussions and all this detailing of all these differences and whatnot, and ever say, take a breath and say, oh, and therefore that's why we have to unify, because the one thing that commonly unites us is we all have to make a living and find some damn boss dictatorship someplace that will hire us, allow us to sell ourselves by this slice. So when you think of it in that context, you take all the visual diversity that you could possibly imagine and put them out there trying to apply for a job. The one thing that's going to unify all those workers is they got to get that job in order to survive. Who the hell wants to live outdoors unless you're camping? Uh, to me, it was just so simple. And I guess I'll just last on this. I get annoyed with a lot of the folks who revel in the diversity and then never bring up the punchline of unity to recognize that it's the class struggle that unites all of us. Now, is that enough? No, you should learn to love your neighbor and appreciate these folks, but you're not going to be able to do that if you don't establish at least some initial basis for unity. And it just, to me, any union drive I've ever been through, and I've been through hundreds, I've had several hundred that were successful. That's what you're doing. You're getting people to put aside phobias and bias and hate. And you're saying, you like it or not, you're going to have to unify with these folks to stage this rebellion, to organize this place, to force this boss to pay you better. And it's gratifying to see people go through that and really change, uh, and become better people, not just union members or even leftists, but just better members of society.
Absolutely. Dalton and I were talking earlier today about how this liberal identity politics is really serves as division more than it does to unify, and how obviously the brigade cares about all of these social issues. I mean, we're very outspoken about black liberation, queer liberation, women's liberation, a free Palestine. All of those things are essential issues that we care deeply about. But we also believe, as you said, that ultimately what unites all of us as working people is working and the exploitation that we face. And when we study history, I mean, thinking of the farm equipment workers or the United Packing House workers, you see that they engaged with and dealt with these social divisions, but they did so around a picket line. They did so on the shop floor, and that they understood that by starting at the economic, the thing that unites all of us, that through that struggle against the bosses, those other social divisions that the owning class uses to keep us divided, ultimately melt away in the struggle that black and white workers engage in together, the struggle that queer workers and straight workers. I mean, that is the key to overcoming these divisions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And to sort of add on to that, in when it comes to like uniting workers and around the idea of like we all have to make a living, it also means tackling very specific issues that some workers might face at their job. So in the book, the meat packers in oral history, of Black workers and the struggle for economic and racial equality, it mentions that one of the things that Black meatpacking workers in Chicago had to face was that at a number of these industries and plants, they would have an asterisk by their name on their time cards. So when the company was having, was making profit but had to reduce, production, they would decrease their workforce. So supervisors and foremen would see the asterisks and know which workers, specifically the Black workers, to immediately lay off. And that was an area where the union and the organizers had to tackle that issue, because in tackling that issue, they not only stuck it to the bosses, but they also gained the trust of Black workers, because this was specifically a Black worker issue, and in doing so, it helped strengthen the unity between white and Black workers. Similarly, when the FE was around in Louisville, when 2 Black stewards were fired, 3,000 workers, predominantly white, walked out on the job to show their solidarity. So in doing things like that, by recognizing that they both had the same issue, which was the boss and the workplace conditions, they were able to unite and basically gain much more than they would have if they were like, oh, I'm going to focus on being this type of worker or that type of worker, which again ties into the reason why industrial unionism is much better than craft unionism. One is collective, one's much far more individualistic.
Yeah, it's a point well taken, and I'll mention a quick vignette from my own career from the same period when I was in Florida with the city. We eventually succeeded in organizing and getting a contract, and then I became the steward, one of several for our department. And by then, the city had begun to hire some non-white, non-Black. There's some Spanish speakers or folks of Latin descent. So a young guy shows up, and he was hired to be a driver. This was sanitation, and he joined the union. My job, it's an open shop, so my job was to run around and catch all these folks. I got no problem grabbing somebody, bending that arm, so many different ways. Now in Florida, one of the odd things, but good things about that public law, probably the only good thing about it, I didn't have to represent non-members. You want to take your chances out there and be a non-member? Well, good luck, buddy. Good luck. You want to join the union? You want to be part of something? We'll look after you like nobody's business. Well, anyway, this young worker, he was Puerto Rican, and a couple of the buttholes in the place start making this noise like he's gay or something, all kinds of shop talk, locker room talk, just what you see in the working class, And it's obvious to me that he's getting harassed. Now, remember, he had joined the union. So I kept thinking to myself, how do I deal with this? He's going to quit. He's going to quit the city. We'll lose a member. He'll quit the union because I didn't do anything about it. And then I thought, no, that's not what it is. It's wrong. This is anti-working class behavior. This is anti-union behavior. The people that were harassing him were not union members. It were these Gator and Skeeter and it was all white guys doing it. And I did what more young workers should do. I went to the old timers in my local. I said, what do you want me to do? What should I do about this? Just talk to me about this. They said, you absolutely go back to that brother and make a public speech. Go into the lunchroom and clear the decks and run a little union meeting and denounce this worker to worker harassment. And you make it clear none of their damn business who this guy snuggles with. He's a union member. And if you're not, you're just the lowest, snail crawling the earth. And so there. And I wasn't sure. I'm thinking, all right, well, I was a little rougher back then than I am now. But I remember going in, and my only question was, am I going to do it with him there in the room or not? And I thought, damn it, I'll do it with him in the room. But I'm not going to point it out to make him uncomfortable individually. I figure everybody had an idea. Anyway, I let go, loud, animated, whatnot. It was like calming the waters. We never had an issue with that after that. I'm sure he suffered some indignities. I'm sure that he felt, harassed at times or whatnot. But we became friends, and his whole thing was, look, I appreciate what you did. I'm really glad I joined the union because I know I got somebody. I said, well, I don't get it. I'm not a gay man. I don't get it, but that don't make it wrong. It's none of the damn employer's business to get involved in any of these things or try to use any of these differences or nuances or anything. Screw them. It's us against them. And I remembered that was in a period of time when people, gays in the LGBT world, it was largely not out of the closet. It was almost a really, you took your life in your hands, you know. And I remember thinking, wow, this is AIDS, I know, had started, didn't even have a name at the time. You had a lot of people convinced that somehow you were going to catch this. It was just an absurdity back then. But I remember the old guys in the local. I thought, all right, they gave me good counsel. Now I got to go carry it out, and I did. And boy, was I glad I did. And it just was one of those things where you learn. You've got to have, you know, I don't know who invented the phrase zero tolerance, but it fits. You know, you just can't let the boss have an inch; they'll take a mile. And these other low lifes and whatnot, they serve the boss. That's what they do. They serve the boss. So it was a you know, I was a little out of breath when I was doing that, and I wasn't sure I was doing the best job of it. But it was good enough to keep that brother in the union the entire time that I was there. So
In wrapping up, and we really appreciate your time today, Chris.
yeah, likewise.
Based on the legacy of William Z. Foster and your experience in left wing union organizing, labor organizing, um, what do working people need to be doing right now? What do organizers need to be doing right now to take advantage of this, you know, golden opportunity that labor has right now?
Yeah, that's the question of the day. You know, and I think I would encourage young leftists and not so young leftists who are maybe reactivating or just joining, coming around the movement for the first time. You got to take Mother Jones' admonition, sit down, read, and prepare for the battles that are coming. And I saw a quote the other day from Debs that I had never seen before, where it was essentially, uh, if I had a little bit of money, the first thing I would do is buy a book. You know, I'm paraphrasing, but that was something along this. It does take time spent to figure this out. And what do I mean by read? I'm not talking about a bunch of stuff that you can buy online that's everybody's opinion and their doctoral dissertation. No, read Marx, read Lenin, read Foster, read Debs, read these folks who were out there. Read Mother Jones. These are the folks that were out there doing this work right out on the line and moving the masses. That was one of the things that Foster used to talk about. We have our job is to move the masses. Well, they're not going to be moved one at a time. You have to look for multiplier effects. You have to look for opportunities, and we need to rekindle in our movement. I know the internet has come along, and it's been a mixed blessing. It's a tool. It's not right or wrong, but our movement, I think, today, because of the nature of the internet and so much being done online and through your iPhone and all this, it sort of has sapped people's vitality for evangelical work. You know, I know when I travel and I see some guy on a street corner with religious pamphlets and I see people doing, I just think to myself, hell yeah, hell yeah. I may disagree completely with it and probably do most of the time, but I think to myself, take your message to the masses, however you can do it. And if you can do it in person, that is far better than doing it through email and whatnot. I mean, what you guys are doing is good because you're doing a combination of things. You're using one to supplement the other. But if at the end of the day you're not reaching very many people in person, where they're at in their neighborhood, uh, in the workplace or whatnot, you're going to go nowhere. And I guess this is the difference. I ask all leftists, socialists, communists, anarchists, however folks think of themselves, I want them to ask themselves, why did you join this movement? Did you join this movement to get something out of it or to put something into it? And I want to win. I want to see an end to this system. And that's a whole different orientation than somebody who just wants to put a brake on that conduct somehow, or let's just have a little more humane regimen of exploitation. The hell with that. You know, and this reminds me of Fred Engels and his wages system. He says, "What is our goal? Is our goal is the business unions, you know, want to have a fair day's pay for a fair day's work?" Hell no. We want to abolish the wages system. These are the ambitions that have gotten covered up in our movement with a lot of things. And that's what we want to put an end to war, put an end to this horrible exploitation. I think nothing in the 45 or 47 years that I've been a leftist, because I radicalized in high school, nothing else needs to be mentioned other than for 47 years, I have watched capitalism run amok on this planet, destroy whole countries, massacre literally millions of people. And now the actual health of the planet as an organism is in danger because this system consumes everything it can touch and devours everything it can touch. And yet we have how many billionaires today as compared to what we had when I started? And we have a planet that's on life support. And it's only going to get worse. I always say when you're sweating your ass off because you can't afford your air conditioning, well, what are you going to do about it? This system is rotten to the core, and it's very deadly for all involved, except for the less than 1% who are making profit off it. So anyway, I appreciate everything. I know you guys are very busy around your area there. Good. Anything I can do to advise or assist, I'm always there. Trade union, left wing. I mean, I have been at this for a long time, and I appreciate you guys reaching out to Walt Tillo. Truly one of the tremendous, solid as a rock, old Bolsheviks. I don't know if he wants me to call him old or not, but I think he's older than me, so I can call him. He truly is one of the reverential old Bolsheviks, and he's that's you earn something when you've been around that long, and you guys will too. So appreciate everything, and it's an interesting time. I think Benjamin, you were the one that was asking about the time. If not now, when? Why wait? I know in any group of young workers I deal with, I dealt with several this morning in different scenarios. I said, there's nothing to wait for other than your demise and your misery. The faster you get started, I mean, it's like all things. Now, let's go. We're getting some people into a salting project that we have. So let's go. And not everybody is up for it. Well, that's fine. They're nice people. They're not going to be the ones who carry us to the finish line, So, or at least not at this stage. Maybe they'll join. Maybe they'll come back and jump in when they see more people in the pool. So, but I appreciate everything, comrades. It's a very good thing. And hello to everybody out there in your network. And wish you all the best.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having this interview, and thank you for all the work you've done in the labor movement.
This union maid was wise to the tricks of company spies. She couldn't be fooled by a company stool. She'd always organize the guys. She'd always get her way. When she struck for better pay, she'd show her card to the National Guard, and this is what she'd say. Oh, you can't scare me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union.